Well, it's interesting too, because with so many single mothers coming up, like the chance of this dowry happening is like negative 1,000.
No.
And even it's interesting too, because when I was thinking about the class difference for Elon Musk and Ashley St. Clair in history, that never would have happened ever.
Yeah, no. I mean, and if it did happen, at least in the more recent history, that would be an illegitimate child. What
would happen to them?
So back then it was really different. Like nowadays, we do this thing where we take a child who's illegitimate and we make them legitimate, which means they have rights of inheritance and all this stuff in probate court. Back then, an illegitimate child, you're not going to legally inherit.
No way.
Yeah, so you have this illegitimate child. It doesn't count, and the church was strict on this too. There was no genetic tests back then either, but let me tell you something. Adoption wasn't even legal until relatively recently.
No way.
The church outlawed adoption. And from ancient Rome, from whenever Christianity became the sort of state religion, all the way up and through like 1850 or so, adoption was illegal. So they were very specific about, what marriages can happen.
So what would happen to the kids whose parents died?
Well, they probably end up in some kind of orphanage or,
okay.
But so it's interesting when you look at it, because what happens is back then, like let's say you married someone and she was barren or she couldn't have kids. You couldn't really know that before. They would maybe marry a concubine who's not a wife, but she can provide a child and he or she can be made legitimate. The church outlawed concubinage when they became monogamous.
So it almost helped the infertile woman because, like in a way, because she still gets to stay married instead of getting divorced.
If you look up what organization on the planet owns the most property, guess what do you think it is?
I'm thinking Bill Gates.
It's the Catholic Church.
Oh no! I should have been able to guess.
The Catholic Church owns the most property. Because what would happen is you'd end up with people who didn't have heirs to pass it on to, and they would gift it to the church. So when they outlawed adoption, so you couldn't adopt somebody to pass it on, you couldn't have a concubine, about 20% of people wouldn't have kids in Europe, and another 20% would only have daughters. So that particular daughter, if she didn't get married, she would have a really nice dowry because she's inheriting everything. It's not just her portion. But anyway, so it's an interesting history. So you can kind of see how that forms Europe and what's different about it. But the part to where we get to today is nowadays you'll see all kinds of strange things. You'll have a kid out of wedlock, and then as soon as the child support agency makes that kid a legal child, now this kid has claims to certain things. That's why sometimes
historically that would never happen.
Because
it would just be the parents.
Yeah. Well, this kid would be a bastard. It'd probably be pretty hard to prove that, first of all. I mean, genetic tests came in the 90s. Relatively, that's where you got Maury Povich, you got the show. Prior to that, you had blood tests. And paternity cases were like some of the hardest cases for our attorneys at the child support agency. Nowadays, they're easy because DNA tests make it so easy. But back then, you'd have to have these whole paternity trials, and you'd have to bring in witnesses, and I saw them, and they were behind the barn, or whatever happened. You know what I mean? So then you can place them there. So then nowadays, I look at genetic tests as like a nuclear bomb in this space, basically, because once that happened, it meant it doesn't matter what the relationship with the child is. This guy's the father. We can immediately get money from him. And this is why child support and custody are separate also, by the way.
I'm curious, do you know anything about like when that did come out, if they found it, like, has this cheating been going on for longer than we thought?
Yeah.
Because I saw someone on Twitter, like, replied to one of my tweets, and they said that they looked at genealogical records and found that there was a lot more cheating from, like, neighbors and other people in town than we know in history. Now, this is a random person on Twitter, so I don't know, but I was just curious. You seem to have read a lot about this topic.
Yeah, I don't know if you can point to any specific numbers on there. I think there was definitely a lot of that because, once again, you couldn't prove it. So, and typically if communities were more homogenized and, your neighbor didn't look that different from you, it might be harder to tell. So it probably did happen. I mean, if you go off numbers now, I think they say out of genetic tests that they actually do, which means that there was a suspicion of cheating already. About 30% of them or something end up not being it. But, there were some indications where I think people might have been suspicious.
If there's DNA tests, God,
it would have been different.
No, I meant now. If there's mandatory DNA tests at birth,
they should do that.
Yeah, but they can't.
I'll tell you this.
They can't because, like let's say 20% of the population is raising kids that aren't there.
And they find out.
And what is that going to do to society?
Yeah.
I don't think the government will ever let it happen.
I'll tell you this. There's less incentive for the government to do it. Because from the government's point of view, they want to see children born that have legal parents that are responsible for them. If the government probably does not want to pay to find out that we don't know who the dad is and then, have more kids on welfare or foster care. I will say there has been suspicions in history. I mean, I think it's called Lord Mansfield's rule. This was in late 1700s. I can't remember exactly. But it was in England and they made it to where you couldn't challenge paternity of the kid all the way back then. So it kind of leads me to believe that there must have been people who were like, that's not my kid. And they were trying to get this figured out until they were like, no, stop bringing this up, basically. So there's always suspicion. It's possible.
Yeah, because I just wonder, do you think any laws will change in the future? I find it, I'm going to give you my thoughts so you can tell me if you agree or disagree. But I find it very improbable because there's just so much money in this machine. So with all the lawyers that are involved, all the policymakers, all of the people benefit, Social Security, I don't see any incentive for it to change. Do you have more hope than me?
I'm definitely guilty of being how you got the just lift bros. I was a just change the laws bro kind of guy.
Yeah.
But, I've spent a lot of time talking with a lot of folks in this space, especially with folks like Paul Elam, Peter Wright.
Yeah.
And they've kind of watched these sort of men's rights initiatives happen over a long period of time just in their lives, but also historically. They've done the research and they've kind of seen that if the culture is not caught up with it, it tends to not happen. I don't see any big push for laws to change, unfortunately. I think with more men avoiding marriage, the only time they start to ask questions is when it seems like they're losing out. Like, oh, the birth rate's down, or this is this, or men's checking out.
There's an incentive then.
Yeah, and it's like, what can we do? And they will do everything they can to avoid giving men stuff. I hate to say it, but what they'll do is like, oh, well, how can we make IVF easier for women?
Yeah.
Or something like that. Or let's give women a tax break or something, and the men get nothing.
They're paying us to have kids.
Yeah, I think I saw that recently. So,
you think $5,000 is gonna help? No.
Yeah, and it's it's kind of a strange thing because we know kids have a tougher time or at least a worse prognosis if the father's not in their life, and there's a lot of people selling marriage, and if they want to do that, they need to make marriage a deal that at least works for both parties. At least during at-fault divorce, okay, there were no dowries back then, but at least in at-fault, you had some protection. If you cheated on her as the guy, you'd get screwed over, and rightfully so. You caused the injury in this. You were at fault. If she cheated on you, you'd be the injured party, and the way that the assets of the marriage get divvied up would be different. So we don't even have that. Now we have no fault. And I know there's an argument. We can't even go back to at fault. That's unrealistic. There'd be so many false abuse cases. It's just would be a waste of money anyways, probably. But, that was at least still, in my opinion, a little bit better. Now we're at no fault. This is why I like to study things like the dowry and things, is because we're in this environment that's so hostile legally. And it's like, if I was going to take the monogamy deal, it would at least make sense. And this is what our ancestors did.
As most of you know, I have been fighting on the front lines of the simp epidemic for years, but I need to tell you about a quiet weapon being ratcheted up against men that is rarely talked about. It's not just the relentless anti-masculinity propaganda and OnlyFans hoes causing the societal issues that we discuss on this show. Did you know that the average city's tap water contains trace pharmaceuticals and endocrine disruptors? This often includes estrogen from birth control. The average adult consumes a credit card worth of plastic every single week. That's 5 grams of plastic a week on average. So it's no wonder that the average male's testosterone is half of what the average was 50 years ago. Testosterone levels decline 1% a year, and without a course correction, we are headed towards extinction. No matter how based you are, you need to be naturally boosting your testosterone. My friends at Choq, CHOQ.com, are on a mission to save mankind from extinction by boosting your vitality. Choq's Male Vitality Stack contains premium and potent herbs clinically studied to naturally boost your testosterone levels, sperm count, and overall vitality. Just one of the many ingredients in the Male Vitality Stack was studied in double-blind human clinical trials to boost total testosterone 20% in 90 days. When you boost your testosterone, you'll have more mental clarity, you're more capable of making decisions and taking risks. Having high testosterone will also affect your pheromones, so women will find you more attractive subconsciously. Get the Choq Male Vitality Stack right now on Choq.com. That's CHOQ.com. Use my name Pearl as your coupon code and you'll get 25% off site-wide on Choq.com. That's CHOQ.com. My name Pearl is the discount code.